In grace, mercy, and peace be to you from God the Father and Jesus the Christ. I don't know if all of you quite noticed, but I was almost here last week. But then I wasn't. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a baby, though, because there was. My sister gave birth last Sunday morning to my new niece, Rebecca Claire Moyer, up in Michigan. Though for them it was maybe a little less exciting than it was for the Billadellos on Friday, because Becca is their fourth child, not their first. Labor is a little more ho-hum the fourth time around. But for Nick and Michelle, Caroline is their first child, and that makes it all the more exciting, makes it all the more nerve-wracking, and I'm sure that most of you know this better than I, it makes it all the more life-changing. But Nick and Michelle don't really know that quite yet, do they? Not really. Yes, they know that some things will change. They know that Caroline needs to be fed every few hours. They know that she needs to be changed. They know that they need to baby-proof their new house. They know that juggling their careers and a child will be difficult at times. We all know those things. But what they don't know yet is how all of those things will change their lives. Either that or they're finding out really, really quickly right now. And I think that's kind of where we find the disciples this week in this text. They don't really know how this Jesus is going to change their lives. Not yet, anyway. We're still pretty early in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4 out of 16, and so far the disciples have been called, and they've heard some of Jesus' teachings, and they've seen Jesus heal others, and they've seen him cast out demons from others, and they've helped to control the crowds on Jesus' behalf, and well, that's just it. In their experience, Jesus is for others. Jesus has come for the crowds of people. Jesus is for the masses. All of those people need Jesus. The disciples think that Jesus just needs them to do their jobs. Much like Caroline needs Nick and Michelle to just do their jobs. But this week in the Gospel, I think that maybe the disciples experience for the first time that Jesus has an expectation that their lives will change also. Just as Nick and Michelle are experiencing the fact that their new life has an expectation that they will change. And it's not just their routines and their roles in the house, but it's a transformation of their thoughts and their priorities and their identities. The expectation is that everything in their lives will change. So let me try to explain this. Our text says that Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea. But what actually disturbed him? What actually woke him up? Because it doesn't seem like Jesus was at all concerned by the storms. The waves and the winds don't matter to Jesus. He'd have been happy to sleep through all of it. It was the disciples who disturbed him. Maybe it was them who needed to be calmed. It was the disciples who woke him. Maybe it was the disciples who needed to be called out too. And so Jesus opens his eyes, begrudgingly, for it had been a long day, a very long day. It starts actually all the way back in chapter 3, verse 7, maybe verse 1. And it's a day on which he woke up and had to deal with the crowds from the beginning. He hiked up a mountain, had a training seminar for his disciples. Then he was unable to eat when he got down because his home was overrun by the crowds and was almost restrained by his family because they thought he was crazy. He told a few of his famous parables, and then he stood on a boat for a while, teaching a crowd of people who stood on the shore. And then after all of that, he had another study session for his disciples. So knowing the long day that Jesus has had, let us try to believe for at least a second that in addition to being fully divine, Jesus was actually also fully human. And so he begrudgingly opens his eyes. and he's exasperated that he's been woken up. And so he throws up his hands and he just cries out, "Peace, be still." And because those are the words of God, the wind and the waves, they do just what they have always done. They still. The chaos ceases to exist just as it had in creation. The waters recede from the boat just as they had following the flood. The wind stills, and the presence of the Spirit is felt, just as Elijah experienced on the mountain. These Jewish disciples, no matter how uneducated they were, had no reason to not believe that Jesus could control the weather. But I wonder if maybe they were too dumb to realize that Jesus had really been talking to them when he said, "Peace, be still." And maybe that's supposed to be a little bit funny, in the way that the disciples just don't get it. How they don't understand that Jesus is rebuking them, or that he expects them, more than anyone else, to be transformed by his teachings. After all, they will be the ones proclaiming the good news and who have the authority to cast out demons. But thankfully, despite how often they just don't get it, no matter how they might deny and desert and betray Jesus, they are transformed, just like all the others who had been healed and changed, taught and transformed. And who knows, maybe this is just an audacious reimagining of the story by a naive young pastor. And though that it may be, I do feel bold enough to say that it may be the interpretation that we need this week. Because I'm afraid that too often we fall into a manner of complacency and assume that we are set, that we are already good Christians, that we're already on the inside circle. And maybe we grow complacent because we've been in worship every week for most of our lives, or because we've been baptized, confirmed, and married in a church, or because we're ushers and communion assistants, or a part of the choir. Maybe it's because we find ourselves in a vibrant, growing congregation, because we're just the good people on earth doing God's work. It can be easy to grow to that point where we start to believe that because we work for Jesus, we don't really need Jesus. Nor does Jesus really expect much of us in terms of change. Because Jesus is for the others. Jesus is for the masses. So we just stand dumbfounded when we do hear Jesus speak. But maybe it isn't funny. Maybe it's just sad that after so many years and after so many incidents, we just don't seem to get it. And it doesn't matter that something unthinkable has happened, or that it's just the latest in a long list of unthinkable things to have happened, we remain dumbfounded. It doesn't matter what year it is, 1963, 1992, 2012, or 2015, we always seem to find a reason that it isn't us who needs transforming. We're very good at denying that fact. We're very good at deserting any of the motivating sentiment when the call is for us to change, and we're too good, in too many ways, at betraying the very peace we claim to pray for. This week's events have brought us face to face with all manners of sin. There are the systemic issues that establish the environment in which such an attack can occur, the blatant and persistent racism that has only become more complex and sophisticated over the years, our nation's gun idolship, and then there are those individual sins in our rationalization or in our cynicism or in any of our other apathetic responses we might have as we deal with the tragedy and mourn the lives that we've lost. And I don't know all of you, and I don't know very many of you very well. So maybe you don't agree that those sins have been contributing factors to what happened this week, but then I think it's important that we acknowledge that Dylan Roof, who was a member of an ELCA congregation himself. There was someone from our very own denomination, one that is full of some of the most humble, unassuming, hardworking, generous, and graceful Christians that committed this heinous crime this week. And maybe it is an anomaly, but that doesn't explain away the fact that we have all kinds of things that need to be acknowledged and talked about, changed, and transformed. And this isn't just for the sake of others, but it's for our own good as well. Jesus expects it. And Rebecca and Caroline deserve it. Let us not deny or betray them the peace that is called for by Christ. A peace for which Christ was willing to change himself, emptying himself of all divine power, subjugated to the humiliation of an unfair judicial system, stripped, bared, and beaten. A far cry from living like a king, all too eager to pass judgment on his subjects. No, Jesus transformed that narrative as well on the cross as he died for Satan. So that no matter the storm, whether it's one of our own making or something more natural, we can be assured in our faith that Jesus is there alongside of us, praying with us, weeping with us, his heart breaking for us. Because at the cross, Jesus died for all, so that all of creation could be redeemed in the eyes of God, whom even the winds and the waves obey. And then from an empty tomb burst forth a new life, a new reality for all, one in which we have the liberty to change and the freedom to transform. For this God is in the boat with us, living with us in the midst of all the turmoil and hate. There is no reason to be afraid, for our faith is in a God who desires peace for all of us. Amen.